Good evening and welcome to the daily Rambam Shir 3 chapters per day. Just mentioned that we are right at the eve of Gimel TAMMUZ. Same way as there are 3 chapters, 3 events in history took place at that particular day. The first one chronologically took place over 3,300 years ago during the war that the Jewish people under the leadership of Yehoshua bin Nun were waging against their enemies who lived at that time in Israel. And it was a very intense war. And then Yehoshua proclaimed the famous statement, Shemesh beGiv'on Dom, the sun in the area of Giv'on. Giv'on were a place and Giv'on were a nation that were in a political alliance with the Jewish people. And in order to give an extra edge for the chances to win the war against their enemies, so the motion and the movement of the solar system, the sun and the moon, have stopped. There is an argument for how long they stopped, whether for 12 hours. There is even an opinion who extends the amount for 36 hours as well.
Excuse me just a second. By the way, in those scripts of Inks and Maya, it was recorded that they have...
This miracle took place. You have external evidence as well. It's always gives extra support, not only from our records but also from external records as well. So this was the first event. There is a second event that took place 96 years ago when the 6 Lubavitcher Rebbe were arrested for getting involved by strengthening Jewish education under the communist regime. An entire infrastructure of underground schools were established by him, and as a result, not only he was arrested, but he was sentenced to a death sentence. So on Gimel Tammuz, his death sentence was sweetened only to exile in the city of Kostroma. So though at that time it was not certain whether it is an improvement or just prolonging a terrible situation, nevertheless later retroactively turned out that that was the beginning, a turning point, and as he expressed, like Atchalta di Geula, a beginning of his, and not only his, but given the fact that he was a public figure and his influence being expanded not only in Russia but later in America, and not only then, but always the Rebbe viewed his activity as a continuation of the previous Rebbe, of his father-in-law's activities. And then the third event, which all of us are being touched by it, is the 29 years ago when definitely the concealment from the Rebbe, from our physical eyes, and bringing a different dimension to the connection between Neshama Klolis, a general soul, is Pashtuta the Moshe in our generation, given it a different dimension that it was accustomed until then. So I thought it will be very appropriate, out of the thousands of episodes and stories and incidents, to choose and to pick something that has a connection both to the Rebbe and to the topic and subject that we are covering today. So there is, in fact, one of the personal assistants that were taking care of the Rebbe's need. He shared an interesting incident that took place between him and the Rebbe in the last period of time. He says it was a Friday, and the Rebbe was standing next to the window in his room. Next to the window in his room, staring into the outside. And he said, you see, Shalom Ber, Friday is a day that everybody is rushing, running, and no matter how Friday, whether it is long or short, there is never time to accomplish what you're really planning to accomplish for Shabbos. Says, I was born on a Friday. The Rebbe was referring to himself, that Yud Aleph Nisan, the 11th day of Nisan, happened to be on a Friday. And exactly my destiny is like a Friday. I'm always running and not achieving anything. He looked at him and he says, really? I mean, take a look at the library, the books that you produced, that summing up to over 200 books at a time. Says, take a look at all your innovations and projects. And then he says, take a look at the greatest institution of all, the institution of shlichus, of emissary, where people are taking your message to far communities at the end of the world and bridging between souls and their source of life. The Rebbe accepted. This may be somewhat of an accomplishment. I chose this story because, first of all, the topic that are being covered the last few days is about time. How to establish time, how to define time, how to place the boundaries of time in a context of a month, in a context of a year, and in a context of a cycle. But then further than this, we will learn about also the institution of shlichus that also associated with time. And I will explain myself. We spoke yesterday about the first commandments that the Jews were introduced while they were still in Egypt, to take and to look at the shape of the moon, and we will find a certain shape. This will be the day that will be announced as the beginning of the month. Why is it so important? Because the holidays, the regalim, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, must be according to a certain day of the month. How will be able to find the day of the month when we have no idea when is the beginning of the month? So in order to have an idea of the beginning of the month, we must have a specific shape of the moon in order to determine that this is indeed the beginning. Now, it is a mitzvah for each and every person who happened to witness that particular shape to run only if he is able to realize, to assess that he will reach the Beit Din before it will be dark tomorrow. If he is calculating that will be sufficient time for him to reach and give testimony in front of Beit Din while it will still be day tomorrow, then he is committed to do so. Even if he says it on a Friday night and it's Shabbat, he can take the horse, he can take some sandwiches, he can take even assistance. Not only he can, but he should. And soon we're going to say, and the obvious question, how am I allowing a person to, what we call, mechalel? What is the word mechalel? Desecrate the Shabbat. And the answer, same way as in Bet HaMikdash, each and every day of the week, and in fact in Shabbat the amount was even doubled of offerings that used to be brought. And in order to pursue the offering. There are many activities, from slaughtering at Iza Melacha, and yet it was done every Shabbat. So our sages, in the oral tradition, they have received the Kabbalah. Everywhere where it says in the Torah the word Bemoado, you should do it Bemoado, in its time. So Chazal are deriving from the word Bemoado, Bemoado af beshabbat, Bemoado af betum'ah, which means that since it says Ele moadei Hashem mikrei kodesh asher tikreu otam bemoadam, so the word bemoadam comes to teach you that in order to define the moadam, it will override even a state of Shabbat. And not only they themselves, not only if they feel they will be hungry on the way, so they'll have to pack some good sandwiches, but also those people should bring with them another sort of what we call it character witnesses, that will testify that they have good, clean records and their testimony can be acceptable. And based upon their testimony, they will establish that today is Rosh Chodesh. Now, originally they were accepting the Bet Hadin, the testimony of the witnesses, throughout the entire day. However, once upon a time, an incident took place, and as a result, they had to make a not due date, but an expiry hour, at what point they cannot accept any longer testimony. What was the incident? In the Torah, and we recite every morning in our prayer, the verse Alea Hashlem Kol HaKorbanot Kulam, that the Tamid Shel Shachar was the first offering that used to be brought in the morning, and Tamid Shel Ben HaArbaim is the last offering that is being brought at the afternoon. Now, just imagine the ideal time to bring the Tamid Shel Ben HaArbaim is after 9.5 hours of the day. So let's say if the day starts at 6 o'clock in the morning, so the time when they were bringing the afternoon offering of the Tamid used to be, let's say, about 3:30. And then suddenly they have 4 o'clock, 4:30, came a set of witnesses running. They were running a whole night to come to testify that they have witnessed the Molad last night. They were in trouble because on one hand, obviously, since they have seen it last night, they have no choice but to declare the day as Rosh Chodesh. On the other hand, if it is Rosh Chodesh, they have to bring a Korban Musaf, the additional Korban offering. However, they cannot bring the Musaf after 3:30 because the Korban Tamid was brought, and after the Tamid, it's sealed. You cannot bring any Korban, so you are in trouble. So what they have done, they made a takana, they made an institution that they are accepting witnesses only until 9.5 hours of the day, which is about 3:30. Until then, no more witnesses. And if they come, we're not listening, we don't hear them, they don't exist, and that day was established not as a day of Rosh Chodesh. Tomorrow will start a new moon. For that reason, we see something very interesting. Everybody knows that Rosh Hashanah, whether it is in Israel or whether it is over here, will be marked 2 days. And the reason is because in Israel was always, most of the time were 2 days. For that reason, because they had, according to their calculation, let's say the first day of Tishrei must be the day of Rosh Hashanah. But it's not clear whether the day the witnesses will come or not. So they decided in Israel anyway to mark it as Rosh Hashanah on a standby basis. If the witnesses will come, great. So we'll celebrate today as Rosh Hashanah, and tomorrow it won't be Rosh Hashanah any longer. If this day is not Rosh Hashanah, if the day is not Rosh Hashanah, so we'll wait until the end of the day, and tomorrow we'll have the real Rosh Hashanah. So therefore, since even in Bet HaMikdash, sometimes they were marking Rosh Hashanah as a 2-day holiday, so this minhag is being kept today as well for that reason. Until now, we spoke about the witnesses. But after Beit Din have already established and proclaimed and announced that this is Rosh Chodesh, then they were announcing it to the rest of the Jewish people. In the early days, the way they were doing it, by making masuot. Masuot is fire, flames on the tops of the mountain. So when one mountain in the day that has the potential of Rosh Chodesh, they saw a fire, so the other mountain they placed a fire as well, the third mountain, so the entire Israel until Babel were covered with fire, and the entire Jewish nation knew that today was Rosh Chodesh. Later on, some group by the name of Kutim, that they were just trolling the Jewish people and never missed an opportunity not to troll them. So they, even in days that were not Rosh Chodesh, that they had a potential to be Rosh Chodesh, in order to confuse the Jews, they were making fires, and since they realized that cannot be a reliable info announcer, the Masuot, so they have established a new institution called the institution of Shluchim. There is a Deim and there is Shluchim. Those people who are, thanks to their testimony, the Rosh Chodesh is being proclaimed, they called Eidim, and they are Mechalel the Shabbat if it's necessary in order for them to provide testimony. The Shluchim are those people that Beit Din, after their announcement, is sending to the Jewish community to let them know at what day Rosh Chodesh was established. So those Shluchim, they have already limits. They cannot go on Shabbat. They cannot even go and desecrate the Yom Tov as well. And for that reason, sometimes some holidays, they manage to let the community know when Rosh Chodesh before the holiday came, and therefore the community didn't have to celebrate Yom Tov as 2 days, but some holidays they were not able to. I'll give you an example. Let's say a community that is far from Jerusalem, a distance of about 12 days. So for that type of community, they were able to reach and let them know when it came the holiday of Passover. However, when the holiday of Sukkot came, they were not able to inform them, since on Tishrei there is extra 3 days of inability to be mobile, which is the first day of Rosh Hashanah, the second day of Rosh Hashanah, on Yom Kippur. So you have extra 3 days that they are making impossible for the shluchim for the emissaries that their job is to announce to reach that particular communities and let them know. So for that reason, now that we don't have a Bet HaMikdash, and you would think, well, those communities that they have celebrated Pesach one day, they should celebrate Pesach one day. And those communities that they were celebrating, which means there are communities that they will celebrate Passover one day since they were able to reach them, and Sukkot 2 days since they were not able to reach them because there is extra 3 holidays. So though it makes sense to differentiate, but nevertheless they instituted, in order not to confuse people, at a moment that a community celebrates and marks one holiday for 2 days, it will always remain 2 days, regardless whether technically the shluchim, the emissaries, have reached their community or not. Always it will be the amount of 2 days will be honored. It is also important to note that after Rosh Chodesh was announced, or to the announcement of Rosh Chodesh in general, they were gathering very early in the morning and having a great feast. And this is called Seudat Mitzvah, that were associated at the Ibur Chodesh, at the time when they announced that Rosh Chodesh is here to be proclaimed on that particular day.
Just a quick question, Rabbi.
Yeah.
So, is it my thoughts and assumption are that different communities in different distances of Yerushalayim were essentially on slightly different calendars?
They were the same calendar. The reason why they were celebrating 2 days, since the shluchim, the emissaries, that their job to be what we call the announcers, to let them know, they were not able to reach them when the holiday came. So they were in a state of doubt whether the Rosh Chodesh was 1 day or 2 days. In other words, whether the previous month is Chodesh Bizmano, a regular Chodesh, which means a Chodesh of 29 days, or Chodesh Me'ubar, Chodesh, a pregnant Chodesh of 30 days. So the halachic definition of a 29-day month is considered Chodesh Chaser, and a Chodesh, a month of 30 days, it's called Chodesh Maleh. Since many communities which were located far from Yerushalayim took a while until they got the info via the shluchim, via the emissaries, so for that reason they celebrated 2 days, whether Passover or whether Sukkot. There is a very interesting topic that